Hey, how's everybody doing on this Wednesday? Um, we are on chapter 14 on The Boy on the Porch by Sharon Creech. I'm reading this with permission from the HarperCollins Publishing Company. And I'm going to go ahead and get started. As John and Marta paid closer attention to the boy's tapping and patting, they quickly noticed patterns they had overlooked. There was a distinct rhythm to the way he greeted each of them. Tap, 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 tap. And the way he greeted the dog. Tap, tap, tap. And the cow. Tap, 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 tap. And the bedtime tapping. Tap, tap, tap. Tap, tap, tap. And the after meals tapping. Tap, 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 tap. He's talking all day long, John. Gradually, they imitated his taps so that they greeted him the way he greeted them, and they began and ended meals the way he did. The first few times, the boy reacted with his silent laugh, his shoulders bobbing up and down. But when he tapped more earnestly at other times, they did not know how to respond, and the boy seemed disappointed. They might guess what he was asking or saying, but they couldn't merely repeat the same taps in reply. If we teach the boy to read and write, Marta, that will solve everything, won't it? He can write down what he wants to say. Marta wasn't completely convinced that the boy was unable to talk. She still wondered if he just was not ready to talk to them, or if he needed to recover from some horrible experience. Maybe he simply needed time. Always, too, at the back of her mind, was the worry that the closer they came to know the boy and the more they loved him, the harder it would be to let him go. On John's weekly trips into town for supplies, he wondered if he would discover that someone had reported a missing boy, or that people were inquiring about how to find John and Marta's place. John could not understand why Jacob's family hadn't returned yet. John had mentioned the boy and asked around, but no one had heard of him or seemed the least bit interested, or even remembered from one week to the next that John had even asked about him. How can that be? He wondered. How can there be a boy nobody knows about or cares about? One day, on his weekly trip to the general store, as John was buying more jelly beans, Shep said, "Your wife got a sudden sweet tooth?" "What?" "Oh, the candy. Ha ha. Thought maybe you had a kid up there. Vernie says he thought he saw a kid riding a cow up at your place when he drove by the other day." "A kid? Oh, sure, the one I mentioned. We're watching a kid." "That right," Shep said. Yep. Watching that kid for somebody, and that kid likes to ride cows. Imagine that." On the far side of the store were shelves that carried used items. You might find bowls or pots or twine or rulers or bent spoons on those shelves. As John turned to go, he saw an old guitar on the floor propped up against the shelves. "Are you playing that or selling it?" John asked. "The guitar? That old thing? No, somebody left it here in trade for a couple of pots. You interested? I'll trade it to you for that jacket you're wearing." As John drove home, he could hardly contain himself. Wait till the boy sees this guitar. I can hardly wait to see that face of his. When John presented the guitar for Jacob, the boy took a step backward, placing his hands against his chest. He looked from John to Marta to the guitar. "For you," John said. The boy took another step backward. "It's a present," Marta said. "For you." "It's a guitar," John added. "Have you never seen a guitar?" "It makes music," Marta said. "Listen, show him, John." "Haven't played one in a while," John said. He touched a few chords, strumming a simple tune. The boy reached out to touch the instrument. "You hold it like this," John said, replacing the guitar in the boy's arms. "Here, try this chord. Your fingers like this, that's right. And this hand, that's right, and then you can switch to this. And that was the only instruction he gave the boy, for once it was in his arms, the boy's fingers moved along the strings, slowly and tentatively at first, and then with more eagerness. And then he sat with it for hours, exploring the possibilities. And by nightfall, he was already making music. It sounded like nothing else Marta or John had heard. It was as if he were creating the sounds of the forest and the dawn and the mountains all rolled together. The sounds moved John and Marta greatly. One minute they would be smiling, and soon after they were close to tears. It was as if the boy had control of their minds and bodies. Twice a week, John drove farther afield to towns, small and large, sifting through gossip and local papers. What he was discovering was that boys were as likely to go missing as cows were. George's boy run off but came home with his tail between his legs. My cow broke right through the new fence. Carl's kid, that one with the hair, he was gone for 4 days, and you know where they found him? In the hayloft over at Aggie's place. My prize Blackie cow, you seen her, right? Gone for 2 days. Comes home with a big smile on her face. Then he read a poster. Missing. 12-year-old boy, mean as a stick. You can keep him. Missing. Pretty brown cow. Answers to Betty. Found. 12-year-old boy, mean as a stick. Come get him. Found. Brown cow, not so pretty. All the boys and cows that were lost seemed to turn up again, though. Unlike the boy at John and Marta's, who had been found, but oddly wasn't lost. And all the time he had been at John and Marta's, the boy didn't seem afraid, didn't seem to miss anyone, slept soundly and ate good. It's like he was dropped right out of the sky, John told Marta one day. Although John was as impressed as Marta was with Jacob's talents, he was beginning to worry that the boy wasn't learning any boy things, and he said as much to Marta. What are you talking about? She said. What kind of boy things? He rides a cow, doesn't he? True. That's good, I guess. What else do you want him to do? Chop down a tree? Burn up the barn? I don't know. Get a little dirty, I guess. For heaven's sake, John, he gets dirty. I ought to know. I'm the one trying to get the dirt out of his and your clothes. Still, John was bothered. So one day he took Jacob and the beagle and 2 fishing rods with him to the creek. His plan was to show the boy how to dig for bait and bait a hook and catch a fish. Along the way, Jacob snatched a maple leaf and folded it into the shape of a bird. He picked up a stick and drummed it on the tree trunks. He bobbed and jigged along the path with the beagle by his side. At a puddle, he stopped to trawl his fingers through the muck at the bottom and painted his arms with stripes of mud. At the edge of the creek, he gathered a pile of stones and rocks and then threw them into the water with a rhythmic plip, plop, plop, plip. When John dug up an earthworm and reached for his rod and hook, Jacob put his palm out, as if asking for the worm, and once he had it, he reburied it. But that's our bait, John said. Jacob tapped lightly on John's arm. Tap, 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 and returned to gathering more stones. He dug a trench along the creek bank and lined it with stones and packed the sides with mud. John watched as the boy collected twigs and leaves and built a strange sort of elfin bridge over the trench. Then Jacob climbed up on a boulder and jumped into the creek with all his clothes on. He splashed and laughed his silent laugh, and then climbed back up on the rock and jumped again and again into the water. He crawled back up the muddy bank and took John's hand and beckoned to the beagle, inviting them to join him. Marta took one look at the wet, muddy man, boy, and dog as they returned to the house. Well, John, she said, is he dirty enough for you? More weeks passed. Why doesn't anyone know about this boy? John asked. We need to get him some clothes. He's looking shabby. Did you hear me, Marta? Why doesn't anyone... I heard you. I don't know the answer to your question, but I do know that the boy needs some clothes. They drove to the nearest town with a clothing store, some 30 miles away. At the counter, the clerk glanced down at the boy and said, "What a quiet lad you are. What's your name?" The boy smiled up at her. "Cat got your tongue?" "He's shy," John said. "How old are you?" the clerk asked the boy. The boy tilted his head and blinked. "7, Marta said. "6, John said. "Oops." The clerk winked at Marta. "I know. My husband can never keep track of our kids' ages either." The boy had twisted around to look at a woman and a young girl standing in line behind them. The boy put his hand up, palm toward the girl, and the girl raised her own palm and tapped his. The boy waggled his arms in a silly way. The girl did the same. "Kids," the woman said to Marta. "Crazy kids." The boy knocked his knees together and the girl did the same. Marta felt such pride. "Yes," she said, "crazy kids." All right. We read about 5 chapters today. The chapters are pretty short. Something peculiar. Still nobody has mentioned the boy, Jacob, and looking for him. Also, something odd. He reached in the mud and put the mud on his arms, and then he buried the earthworm that was supposed to be fishing bait. What do we think about him burying this earthworm? That's our question for today. If you are on Google Classroom, just post your answer in one of the comments below. And I hope you get out and enjoy this nice weather today. Join me again tomorrow for our next read aloud. Bye.